how did you become a non-feminist woman?
Oh, I never became a feminist, so I mean that pretty much. I just never liked the ideology. Everything I learned about it really didn't seem, I don't know, valid.
Hmm.
I guess the best way I can put it is my experience growing up was such that everything that feminists said about being a girl and a woman sounded wrong to me.
Hmm.
And so I just never became a feminist.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think any of the women that I grew up around were feminist either. I know my mom and my grandmothers were not.
Hmm. Okay. And do you believe we live in a patriarchy?
No. I know that some people have a different definition of patriarchy than feminism. And I mean, I do believe that we have traced our families in under like English common law and the culture is influenced by it through the male, which is everybody always says, well, that's all it is. But feminism's patriarchy theory does not apply. And the idea that women have never had power is silly. When women appeal to government, whether it's run by just men or men and women, for anything, they get it.
Hmm.
So it's kind of silly to say that we've lived under a patriarchy.
Okay. So women also influence society and the societal structures, and those structures benefit women as well in some ways.
Oh, definitely. In fact, if you go back and you look at coverture and how feminists characterize it, and then you go back and look at the actual details of what it was really like, um, you find that the whole point of coverture was to protect women from the harsh realities that men faced.
Hmm.
The men had a level of accountability for their families as the heads of household that would have been under the circumstances without technology and without um, a lot of ease of living, basically, where women's lives were pretty much taken up with their domestic uh, duties and caregiving for their children, and everything was harder to do and took longer and everything.
Okay.
For women to take responsibility financially for the family would have been a huge burden, and it was rough on poor families when the mother had to work.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it really did benefit women.
Okay. Okay. So, what are your thoughts on traditional gender roles?
I think that there was a long time where they were incredibly important, kind of for the reasons that I described just a minute ago, that a lot of the harsher realities that men faced, if you had both parents facing those realities, you'd have a really rough time keeping your children alive. And so you had to have a division of labor, and that division of labor had to have one parent doing the direct caregiving for the children, being the person that was home, taking care of household chores, making sure that there was food on the table, and so on.
Hmm.
And I don't think that it was harmful to anybody for that division of labor to happen. And that's pretty much what the gender roles revolved around. Now, as we developed gadgets and appliances and all kinds of things that made housework easier, it became a little less important for that division of labor to be so stark. And it's not a big deal that there are women who work now, um, but it would be. It's still better if there is one parent that is more available in the home for the children, and most of the time that's probably going to be the mom. But it's also very important that the dad is right there in the picture and gets parenting time and gets to interact with the whole family, and that they are in a happy, loving relationship, and it's not something that's imposed by a belief that, well, we have to do this because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Okay. 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 And how do you? What are your thoughts on men's rights activists?
So I have to say I am a men's rights activist. I got started as an anti-feminist activist more in terms of abortion, and once I started to understand what that issue really was about, I went from being a non-feminist to an anti-feminist really quickly. Um, I had to have it explained to me by my grandmother. My grandmother was a nurse, and she pulled no punches in terms. I was like 13 years old, so she pulled no punches in terms of exactly what happens during a surgical abortion, and that I never for a minute considered the idea that was anything but awful. And so that was where I started noticing that feminism wasn't just something that wasn't for me. It was downright wrong. But then as I went through from about high school, early high school, through experiences with the guys around me, I started to realize that there was more than just their advocacy for abortion. There's mistreatment in the court system. There's mistreatment in the way that they view families. It became pretty obvious that feminism existed partly to break down the family.
Right. And so wait, you don't you're not pro choice.
No.
Okay.
Not exactly. I'm anti-abortion is a better way to put it. And I don't think that law is going to be the most effective way to deal with that.
Right.
So you could say I'm pro-choice, except that I think the right choice is not having an abortion. So I'm more pushing for education. But that's a good way to explain it. Is I'm pro accountability, and probably the starkest example of what I like to call the accountability gap between men and women is reproductive rights and reproductive responsibilities and reproductive choice. Right? Both sexes have the legal right to choose whether or not they want to have sex, whether or not they want to do it before marriage, whether or not they want to do it with someone they're not going to marry. But having the right to do something doesn't necessarily mean doing it is the right thing, right? So both sexes can choose to be unwise in their sexual choices. Both sexes can choose to go down the path that leads to unwed parenthood. What happens when a man does it is he gets to the point where the woman is pregnant and he has no choices left. He's on the hook and there's nothing he can do about it. He can't say no. He can't walk away. He can't choose not to. He can't even choose not to earn enough money to pay a significant amount of child support. Because if a judge thinks he's doing that on purpose, then he can be held in contempt. The judge can order him to make more money, and if he doesn't, he can be held in contempt.
Right.
Whereas with a woman does it, she has all kinds of options besides she has abortion, but besides abortion, she also has safe haven abandonment, and she has the ability to put the child up for adoption. She can relinquish custody to the father. She can relinquish custody to other family, depending on who's willing. So she has all kinds of ways out. And then the other end of it is if she chooses to retain custody, she can rely on the fact that the state will make him pay child support. And then she also has all kinds of state programs that are funded by tax dollars that mostly come from men to pay for her living expenses. And even though it's a poverty wage, it's still money that she's getting because she made unwise choices. So that's a big gap in accountability right there. And what it does is it takes away the consequences for those choices, and it takes away the discouragement for those choices. So if women didn't have that safety net, and they didn't have all those safety nets, and you knew, well, if I get pregnant, I'm screwed. More women would be careful about who they chose for sex partners, or whether or not they were doing things before marriage. Women would be more like men about that, in that they wouldn't sleep around, or they would use birth control. They would choose more carefully who they were with. And I know there are men that make a lot of mistakes and are careless and everything. But the other end of it then is, if women were unaccountable, they would be held accountable by circumstance or by the state. And so, as the men's rights activist end of this is, I don't think that a woman should be able to drag a man with her into unplanned parenthood, because she has all those choices to not do that. And men have no choices. And I think that mandatory child support, along with welfare and all of the other options that women have, encourage single motherhood. And single motherhood is actually unhealthy for the mother, the child, and the father. It creates a rough life for the mother.
Right.
It creates a disadvantage start for the child that statistically results in a higher incidence, about a 50% higher incidence, actually, of the next generation being unwed parents, of welfare dependence throughout their lives, of having difficulty in school, of criminality. So it's basically kind of like starting your kid out with a handicap that you decided you were going to give them. And it doesn't necessarily affect every kid, and there are other circumstances that can mitigate that. But why put your kid in that situation in the first place? So when I look at this, my men's rights activism end of it is two things. I advocate for equally shared parenting rights. So if a father wants equal custody, that should be the default that the court settles for, and there should have to be an actual agreement between the two parents, or a hearing that where it's proved that there is a valid reason to do so, in order for him to lose parenting time and parenting rights. And the other end of it is, just like women, he should also have the same right to walk away. And it's not an ideal thing. If guy came to me for advice and said, should I walk away, I would say no, because that's your kid, and you're going to regret it later, because your kid's going to have a worse outcome if you're not there. And it's worth it to you to brave whatever you're dealing with to be there for your kid. But again, just because something is the right thing to do doesn't mean you don't have the right to not do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so what is your take on a bit like the concept of gynocentrism, or the concept of like a male empathy gap, male sympathy gap, that women may have life a bit easier because maybe they get more sympathy from society or so?
Gynocentrism is it's been around for a long time. I would say we have maybe a fraction of natural gynocentrism to what we have in terms of how society is today. I think it was.
So you
always,
think gynocentrism is a thing? You would say women
it's definitely
have life,
a thing.
Would you say women have life easier than men, or how?
Well,
in society, we get more sympathy, or how is this expressed in a sense?
I would say that we get a significant amount more sympathy. If you look at just in terms of what people tolerate, if you think of taxation as, most people feel like they're being pickpocketed when they get taxed, right? But people will vote themselves into more taxes. if you ask for help for women
Okay.
and you ask for help for women and children.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask for help just for men, then they don't.
Okay.
If you say men are suffering, they say, well, men should do something about that,
Right.
right? So that there is definitely a sympathy gap there.
Right.
And in terms of gynocentrism, you have to go back to how humans reproduce. Like we're a sexually reproducing species.
Mm-hmm.
We raise our offspring, and we actually have to pay quite a bit of attention to them throughout their entire youth, or they can end up from early on till they're about half grown. Like if you just leave them alone, they will die.
Mm-hmm.
And even once they're about half grown, there's still lots of dangers that parents have to constantly be monitoring. So, that division of labor that I talked about before, that's existed pretty much throughout time for humans. And that level of gynocentrism, where a woman is a little more sheltered because she's at home with the kids. The woman's responsibilities are different from the man's responsibilities, and they're not as dangerous. Those things, those are natural, but those are related to child rearing. So it's more of a child centric thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the natural end of it. But about if you look up a website called gynocentrism.com, it's Peter Wright's website.
Mm-hmm.
He pretty much researched and wrote about the origins of cultural gynocentrism, where women are treated with deference and preference in society just because they're women, even if they're not childbearing and even if they're not responsible for children. So, for instance, circumstances where childless women get legal privilege, or circumstances where if there's a resource or a safety net or whatever, it's specifically to benefit women, and it doesn't rely on whether they have children or not. Like welfare does, there are some aspects of welfare that do rely on whether you have children or not, but for instance, the Violence Against Women Act doesn't. And it treats violence in the home differently depending on whether the person who's perpetrating that violence is male or female, and depending on whether the victim is male or female. So that's cultural gynocentrism. Treating women like they need more resources just because they're women, or like they need more protections just because they're women. And I would say coverture was, in a lot of ways, a result of cultural gynocentrism. Coverture was basically the husband is responsible for the wife, so he is treated he has legal personhood, and the state can act upon him, but he covers his wife. She is shielded and sheltered from the state. So anytime the state would normally interact with an individual, if the individual is a wife, the state acts upon her husband in her stead. That's basically coverture in a nutshell. And so, in order for that to happen, there were things that women couldn't do, right? And that was the drawback of gynocentrism, cultural gynocentrism. And the benefit of cultural gynocentrism was you couldn't go to jail for not paying your taxes. You had a built-in, your husband had to support you. It was the law. He had to support you. If you came into the marriage with property, he was responsible for it. It wasn't his right to spend it out of your interest or use it in conflict with what you wanted to do, but he was responsible for it. He had to manage it. And you couldn't interact with the people that he would have to interact with to manage that. That was all him. So if there was a bank loan, it was all him. If there was a property dispute between you and your neighbor in regard to your property, that was all him. He had to deal with all that. So that was basically how gynocentrism kept women kind of from doing a lot of the things after marriage that a woman would have done if she was single, or that a man would do, right? But at the same time, it also kept the state from acting upon her and interfering with her, and it kept her from having to face a lot of conflict.
Okay.
And
what would you say are the biggest issues that face men today?
Well, there's a number of them.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is that they do not have full legal parenting rights.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is they do not have full legal due process and rights. And the third one, and this is, I think is the biggest, is they do not have full legal ownership of their own bodies. And I say that because they're the gender that gets drafted, at least in the United States.
Right.
If due process is a really big one, because if you're accused of a crime and you don't get a fair trial, you could be completely innocent and you may be found guilty.
Right. Okay. Do you think that feminism has helped men?
No. I don't think feminism has helped anybody.
Okay. Yeah, I can agree.
I think women face a lot of drawbacks that they don't realize from feminism.
Yeah, I don't think feminism has helped women. I think feminism may have helped a few women, the women who very specifically were some women, but not the majority. Okay.
Social progress could have happened without feminism.
For sure.
The division of labor that I talked about
under
could have evolved without feminism.
Yeah.
But the division of labor that I talked about before could have evolved without feminism. You don't need a political movement that focuses only on what women want in order to change how we deal with family issues, family structure, the division of who is the breadwinner and all that.
The political movement should have been egalitarian or gender equalist from the beginning.
And the focus should have been on maintaining the love and dedication in a family, and the ability of both parents to keep focus on taking care of their kids.
Right. I mean, and I don't think that the women of the past were clamoring to get out of families or anything like this. I think, of course, this was it was, what do you call it? It hurt restrictive, and it hurt some women. Okay, they didn't like family. That is important for them to be free of. But in general, I think it was okay. The issues could have been dealt with in a far more rational sense, from a gender egalitarian perspective, acknowledging that both men and women on either side have issues, and if you want change, then you bring it about like that.
Right.
What are your thoughts on intersectionality?
So intersectionality is kind of an interesting trick, right? Intersectionality takes old school progressivism, which is socialism, and integrates it with the feminist victim narrative in such a way that if you take the progressive stack, the progressive stack is the hierarchy of victimhood that progressives sort of invented based on the idea of historical victimhood. So it could be your position in the stack could be affected by your race. It could be affected by your religion. It could be affected by your national origin.
Right.
It could be affected by disability and so on.
Yeah.
Right. But every place in the progressive stack where you say you're higher or lower in the hierarchy of victimhood based on those other things, feminism then takes the female half of that layer and says, oh no, but women have it worse, so they're more victim-y than the other victims in this particular demographic. So historical religious persecution, okay, yeah, but the women of that religious group had it worse than the men, so they get a better position, right? Of that progressive stack. That's intersectionality in a nutshell.
Right.
So in other words, it's baloney.
And in terms of intersectionality, they also encourage people to make these sort of moral judgments without trying to look at it objectively or critically or anything like that. And they just encourage people to, this sort of, it's also, it festers hatred and stuff like this. And
right.
Yeah,
it's a formula for dividing people.
Right.
It's a formula for keeping people from being good neighbors and collaborating on improving the conditions in society.
Right.
That's what intersectionality is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the time is up. I only have free Zoom, so that's the end of the interview. But thanks a lot for interviewing. I appreciate it.